Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is the 18th episode of the summary of the Quran. We've already started the fourth group of Quranic surahs, and I mentioned that it has 9 surahs, 8 Meccan and 1 Madanan. The basic theme that distinguishes this group of surahs from others is the prominent mention of the affirmation of the prophethood. Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, the truthfulness of him being the prophet of God is highlighted in this group. It is highlighted elsewhere too, but in this group it is more prominent, as indeed we also find that in this group all other important subjects like warning to the disbelievers, good news to the believers, and the guidance for purification and moral and spiritual upliftment of the believers is also mentioned. We did 3 surahs yesterday, Surah Al-Furqan, Ash-Shu'ara and An-Naml. But I did mention at the beginning of Surah An-Naml that Surah An-Naml as well as Surah Al-Qasas, they are forming a pair. The 27th and the 28th surahs respectively. Both surahs begin with Tasin, even though Al-Qasas has a meme in addition as well. And I did mention before that surahs beginning with Ta have something to do with serpent snakes, and the story of Musa alayhi salam is to be found in all these surahs beginning with Ta. And the stories of Musa alayhi salam are always accompanied by the mention of the snake serpent. We start with Surah Al-Qasas, that is the 28th surah. It's going to be followed by 2 other surahs, Al-Ankabut and Ar-Rum, which are forming a pair as well. Natlu alayka min naba'i Musa wa Fir'auna bil haqq. The Almighty says that we are recounting some parts of the story of Moses and Pharaoh exactly the way the story happened, bil haqq. The truth is that Pharaoh became oppressive in the land of Egypt and divided its citizens into factions, oppressing one faction among them, slaughtering their newborn sons while keeping their females alive. So Pharaoh came to learn about the fact through his people who would prophesy the future that there are going to be people from the children of Israel, one person in particular who is going to be his enemy, and therefore all sons that are newborn sons that are found should be killed. Indeed, he was among the tyrant oppressors. On the other hand, we had decided to favor those who were oppressed in the land, and we had decided to make them leaders, imams, and inheritors of the land. That's what God does. God is great. God is powerful. He has all the authority in his hands. So he chooses some people to be oppressed on one occasion, but then decides the same oppressed people to become leaders, and the others who were oppressing them are just obliterated, gotten rid of. Then we move on to verses 12 to 13, where the Almighty is mentioning that Musa alayhi salam, Moses, is born, and God asks for him to be put afloat in the river. The message is conveyed to his family that this boy is not to be kept with them and has to be put afloat. And thus the family does. And then when the baby is taken by the flow of the river to close to the Pharaoh's place, his men pick the baby from the river, and Pharaoh's wife was impressed, and it so happened that the Quran says when they decided that this baby is to be kept with them, and you never know, Pharaoh's wife said that we might adopt him. وَحَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِ الْمَرَاضِعَ. We made him to refuse suckling by wet nurses. Obviously, Pharaoh was a few days old. And yet, the Almighty's might, His overarching control over everything, caused the child to refuse to suckle. So that was the plan of the Almighty, and He knows how to implement the different elements of His plan. So when Moses' sister was able to get there, she said, "Shall I point to you a family who will look after him for you and will do it sincerely?" So when the child was crying and was not refusing to have milk, obviously they were worried. And in came this girl, Moses' sister, and she made this tempting offer. And thus we returned, God says, we returned him to his mother, that she might be content and not grieve, and that she would know that God's promise is true. But most of the people don't know. God makes promises, and one of the most significant promises that He is going to raise those who are dead back to life and make people accountable for their deeds, and then ultimately decide as to who is going to be successful and who is going to be punished. But unfortunately, most people don't pay heed to this promise of the Almighty. All promises of God get fulfilled. Then what happens is that we find in verse 24 onwards that Moses, grows up and he accidentally kills a person, for which reason he had to leave the place to save his life. So he reaches Madian, where he helps two ladies water their flock of animals. After having helped them out, he is all by himself. He comes back to the tree where he was getting shade. ثُمَّ تَوَلَّى إِلَى الظِّلِّ. Then he went back to the shade. فَقَالَ. Then he prayed. رَبِّ إِنِّي لِمَا أَنزَلْتَ إِلَيَّ مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَقِيرٌ. O my Lord, I desperately need of whatever good you may send down to me. Obviously, he's left his place. He has walked a long way and come to a place where nobody knows him. And he makes this prayer sincerely, and that's exactly what God wants. People should pray to him with desperation, sincerity, and his response comes. And soon afterwards, one of the two sisters whom he had helped, she comes to him, and thereafter he goes to their family. He's gotten married to one of the two sisters, and he lives there for 8 or 10 years. And the story of Moses then continues. So that's the part of the story that the Almighty narrates to let us know that even when we are in situations of desperation and difficulty, if we are sincere to the Almighty and we are well-meaning individuals, God's invisible hand comes to our rescue. Verses 49 and 50, they are addressing the people of Mecca. And after describing the story of Musa alayhi salam, the Quran mentions the fact that before the Quran it was Musa who had a book, Torah. That was the book of God as well. That book was also a book of guidance, and this Quran has come after the Torah in continuation with the Almighty's scheme of guiding people towards the right path. And this book too is guiding people on the right track. So the Quran is challenging people of Mecca, and telling them, Qul, O Prophet, tell them, Fa'tu bi kitabim min indillah. So if you are not prepared to accept Torah and the Quran as God's words and books of guidance, then bring forth kitabim min indillah, a book from God, huwa ahda minhuma, which is more straight than these two books. The Quran says, tell them, attabi'hu, I will follow it. The Prophet will follow it. In kuntum sadiqeen, if you are really truthful. That is, we are only looking for guidance, true guidance from God. The Prophet has been asked to tell these people that I am following the Quran because it is the book of guidance from God. It's not something that is going to personally benefit me, that you will start following it as well. If your concern is similar to my concern, that you want to be guided, then either bring forth a book of guidance from God which is even more straight than the Quran and Torah. If that's what you are going to be able to do, I'll follow it as well. But if you are not able to do it, then know that they are only following their own desires. The Quran tells the Prophet, then know for sure that they're just after their desires. They don't really want to understand the truth and follow the right path. And who can be more misguided than the one who follows his desires without any guidance from God? So this is what has been mentioned to the people of Mecca. And then we come to this very clear and important verse of the Quran, verse 56 of Surah Al-Qasas, where the Almighty mentions His sunnah, His policy regarding the matter of guidance. Who are the people who get guided and who are the people who do not get guided? God says, innaka la tahdi man ahbabta. O Prophet, you cannot guide whom you will, you desire. Walakinna Allah yahdi man yasha. Instead, it is God who guides whom He wants, whom He desires to be guided. Some people quite often mention this verse, but only the one part of the verse, claiming that we've got no say in guidance. I mean, if some people are guided, it's none of their virtues, achievements. And if others are misguided, it's none of their faults. Because God says that He guides whom He wills and He misguides whom He wills. They miss the point because they do not bother to read the next part of the verse, which says, وَهُوَ عَالَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. And He knows very well who the people deserving guidance are. So that guidance is given by God, but He gives guidance to those people who deserve them. They are the ones, according to the Quran, who take interest in guidance, who are looking for guidance. And they in turn are the people who are good-natured people, who have cared to preserve their nature in its pristine form. So the Prophet, even though he was very eager that all peoples that he was addressing should be guided, the Almighty said, it's not your decision, it's my decision, because I know who are the ones who are keen to be guided, and I'll guide those people only. And the ones who are not interested will not be guided. We then move on to the next two surahs, Al-Ankabut and Ar-Rum, the 29th and the 30th surahs respectively. These two surahs and the subsequent two surahs, Surah Luqman and Surah Sajda, they are all beginning with the same letters, disjointed letters, huruf muqattat, as were in the beginning of Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran, that is Alif Lam Mim. They are both surahs are addressing Quraysh, and there is a reference to the people of the book in Surah Al-Ankabut, and in Ankabut the same point is emphasized, that is warning the disbelievers, give good news to the believers, by making reference to some historical incidents. While in the case of Surah Rum, we find that it's more of natural phenomena that is referred to for the purpose of bringing home the point that God's message is the truth, and those who are rejecting it are going to be punished. Those who've accepted it will succeed. We take the first Surah Al-Ankabut first, and the second and third verses. The first verse is Alif Lam Mim. The second and third verses, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ahasiban nasu an yutraku wa yaqulu amanna wa hum la yuftanun. Do these people who have believed, they think that they are going to be spared simply by saying that they believe and they are not going to be tested, tried? The Almighty says, وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. We have most certainly tested those who came before them. فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا. So God would make sure that He distinguishes those people who are truthful in their claim. وَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ. And He's most certainly going to find out who are the ones who are lying, that they believe. And in a subsequent verse, in verse 11, the Almighty says that فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. God is most certainly going to find out who are the ones who truly believe. وَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ. And is going to find out who are the ones who are hypocrites. These verses are significant because they were revealed in Mecca. And it was a pretty relatively earlier stage of the Meccan surahs that this surah is. And yet, the Almighty is warning those people who believed that if they are not going to be true to their commitment to belief, and if they are not going to face the difficulties that they are finding in following the message of the Almighty, then there is a danger that they may turn out to be hypocrites. Even though hypocrisy, we know generally speaking, is a phenomenon that emerged in Medina, quite understandably so, because in Medina it was becoming more and more clear that the Muslims are going to dominate. They are going to get stronger and stronger. So there was a temptation for some people who didn't believe, who didn't really have faith in their hearts, to join the ranks of Muslims to benefit from the victories, conquests that they would make and be a part of the group that is going to benefit from the spoils of war, etc. In Mecca, especially in the early stage of the prophetic mission, there weren't any such clear signs of victory around the corner. And yet the Almighty is giving this stern warning to the believers that if they're going to start complaining against the difficulties that they're facing, then they must know most clearly that God has decided that He's going to distinguish those people who are true believers from those who are hypocrites through these trials. Then from in the next subsequent verses, after mentioning briefly stories of many messengers, in verse 40 the Almighty ends by mentioning their punishments and says, فَكُلًّا أَخَذْنَا بِذَنْبِهِ. So each one of those nations we seized in punishment for their sins. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ أَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِ حَاسِبًا. Among them were those whom we sent a storm of stones, like in the case of Lut alayhi salam. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ أَخَذَتْهُ الصَّيْحَةُ. And there were others, those who were struck by stunning thunder, like the nation of Thamud, Saleh alayhi salam. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ خَسَفْنَا بِهِ الْأَرْضِ. And there were still others, we made earth to cave in on them, like Qarun, Korah. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ أَغْرَقْنَا. And finally there were those whom we drowned, like Noah, Nuh alayhi salam. وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيَظْلِمَهُمْ. In all these stories, it wasn't God who was unfair to them. وَلَكِنْ كَانُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ يَظْلِمُونَ. Instead, it was those people themselves who were unfair. That is, God is not unfair to the people. It's humans who deliberately do wrong, and that is what makes them be unfair to themselves. They go against their own nature. By doing wrong deliberately, they spoil their nature and they become eligible for the Almighty's punishment, which really means that they were being unfair to themselves. Then the Almighty says that the protection these people are seeking from entities, deities other than God, those the expectation of that protection is such a weak protection. The idea is so wrong that the kind of protection that they are seeking is similar to the protection which a spider hopes to seek from his home. So the Almighty says that مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ كَمَثَلِ الْعَنكَبُوتِ. Those who are making gods apart from the God, Allah, those who are making them their protectors, their example is like the example of the spider. اتَّخَذَتْ بَيْتًا. It too makes a house for itself. But undoubtedly, إِنَّ أَوْهَنَ الْبُيُوتِ لَبَيْتُ الْأَنْكَبُوتِ. Undoubtedly, the spider's house is the weakest of houses. لَبَيْتُ الْأَنْكَبُوتِ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. If they can only understand. So what they are looking forward to getting protection from is a very weak source of protection. God Almighty goes on in verse 45 to say, O Prophet, utlu ma uhiya ilayka min al-kitab. You recite before them, read to them from what has been revealed to you in the book. Waqimis salat. And say your prayers regularly. That is, keep doing your job. Don't be deterred, distracted by what they are doing, what they are saying. Read out the book to them and recite and say your prayers regularly. Inna salata tanha anil fahshai wal munkar. Indeed, prayers, they stop people from doing what is obscene and what is evil. Wala zikrullahi akbar. And God's remembrance is very strong. It's great. Wallahu ya'lamu ma tasnaun. And God knows what you do. Thereafter, the Almighty is asking believers that if at all there comes an occasion when they are to discuss and debate with people of the book, they must do it properly. So, in other words, what we find is that there is an indication that the stage had come when, quite apart from the polytheists of Mecca, there were people from the outskirts, more particularly from Medina, people of the book were coming to talk to Muslims. Obviously, they felt that this message is asking people to believe in the message of God, giving reference to the people of the book and their books that they already have with them. So there were some people from amongst the Jews and the Christians who were attracted towards the message of the Quran. Some were doing it positively, some were debating. The Almighty says, وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ. And do not debate with the people of the book, إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Except in a way which is good. Do it in a good, decent way. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْهُمْ. Except for those people amongst them who are unfair. Obviously, there would be some people who would be insulting, not interested in knowing what the truth is, not debating properly. That's a separate issue. But generally speaking, if you are talking to somebody who is a Jew or a Christian, do it properly and decently. وَقُولُوا آمَنَّا بِالَّذِي أُنزِلَ إِلَيْنَا. and tell them, we believe in what was revealed to us, what has been revealed to us. وَمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكُمْ, and we also believe in what was revealed to you, to your prophets. And look here, وَإِلَهُنَا وَإِلَهُكُمْ وَاحِدٌ, our God, deity, and your God, your deity, is the same God, same deity. That is, there is no difference between our God and your God. وَنَحْنُ لَهُ مُسْلِمُونَ, and we are just submitting to Him. We are doing nothing except submitting to the same God, who is your God as well as our God. It's so unfortunate that some Muslims are bent upon demanding from everybody that when you talk about God, just say Allah and don't say anything else, don't say God. The Quran here is very clearly saying that tell the people of the book that your God and our God is the same God. So if we are going to use the word Allah all the time, then it's going to create this impression which God doesn't want us to create, that our God is different from their God. If they have some incorrect concepts attached to God, those concepts need to be clarified, but we must use the common language and create the right impression, which is your creator, our creator, your sustainer, our sustainer. The entity who is worthy of, deserves to be worshipped and to be submitted to, is only one entity. He is God, He is Allah, He is Rahman. Call Him by whatever name. But this common grounds have to be first agreed upon before we move on to some of the differences, if at all we need to. Then we move to verse 48, where the Quran is emphasizing and pointing out one important reality, that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, wasn't literate. It says, وَمَا كُنْتُ تَتْلُو مِنْ قَبْلِهِ مِنْ كِتَابٍ. And O Prophet, you weren't the one who used to be reading from any book before this. وَلَا تَخُطُّهُ بِيَمِينِكَ, nor were you writing, you used to write with your hand. إِذَا لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. Had that been the case, then the perpetrators of falsehood would have had a reason to doubt. But they know that you, despite being the noblest of the noble, the pious person, morally upright, you had no inclination towards reading and writing and poetry or oratory, etc. And yet you have come up with a book and you keep presenting its verses from time to time, claiming it to be from God, verses which are remarkable, amazing. How come this could have happened, except for the fact that you acknowledge that it's from God? Then we move on to the next surah Rum, which is the 30th surah of the Quran. It too begins with Alif Lam Mim and says, غُلِبَتِ الرُّوم. The Romans, Byzantines have been defeated. Fi adnal ard, in the nearby land. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. Yet after their defeat, they will be victorious. So, while there was this struggle going on between believers and disbelievers in Mecca, there was another struggle going on between the Romans, Byzantines, and the Persians. And as indeed is the case with us humans, even when we do not agree completely with a certain group, if there is a struggle between two groups outside our territory domain, we tend to side with the group with which we have closer association because of their views and our views. Not that we agree completely with them. So, likewise was the case with believers. The Romans, Byzantines, were the ones who were believers in God and His books. They were Christians, Roman Catholics. And the people of Persia were the worshippers of fire. So, while the polytheists of Mecca had their association with, they were emotionally closer to the Persian people, Muslims, believers, found themselves more close to the Romans, and the Romans got defeated. So it was a setback for the believers as well. So the Almighty mentioned this incident, that there was this war that was fought between the two superpowers of that time, and the Persians were able to defeat the Romans. And the disbelievers, polytheists of Mecca, they, apart from causing harm to Muslims by making other statements, remarks, they also started saying that, look here, there is no room, no scope for monotheism and for people who claim that they have got messages from God. Look, your own fellows, allies, Romans have been defeated. So the Almighty said that this situation is going to change very soon. Yet after their defeat, they will be victorious within a few years. Fi bid'i sinin. Their matter belongs to God from beginning to end. And at that time of victory, the believers will celebrate. That is, after this defeat of the Romans, when they will again be victorious, the believers would celebrate. Binasrillah, it will happen with God's help. Yansuru man yasha, He helps whom He wills. Wa huwal azizur rahim, and He is mighty, compassionate. Wa'adallah, this is God's promise. La yukhlifullahu wa'adahu, and God does not go against His promises. Walakinna akthara an-nasi la ya'lamun, even though most people don't know, they don't understand this. Ya'lamuna zahiran min al-hayat ad-dunya, they only understand what is apparent in this worldly life, what they can see, what is visible to them. وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ, and they are oblivious of the realm of the hereafter. So these verses were revealed, and within a span of a few years, it actually happened that the Romans were able to finally defeat the Persians. They inflicted heavy losses on the enemy, and this was the occasion when the Muslims were rejoicing it. And it is said, also said, that this happened when the Muslims were also victorious in the Battle of Badr. Verse 21 says, he talks about the signs of His attributes. He starts talking about the signs of His attributes from verse 20 to 25. In verse 21 he says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. And amongst His signs is the fact that He created spouses for you from among yourself, so that you may live with them in harmony. The Quran says, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, and He has instilled affection and kindness between you. That is, in many cases, a marriage takes place and the couple doesn't know each other. They have been either strangers or would not have known each other quite as well. But as a consequence of this nikah, marriage taking place, the Almighty creates love, affection, concern for each other. Inna fi zalika la-ayat, indeed in it are signs liqawmin yatafakkarun, for the people who ponder and reflect. Signs of the fact that there is somebody who has arranged this existence to come about. He is the one who is the creator. He is the one who is running the affairs of this world and making sure that things go in the right direction. And there are a number of signs which He has arranged for people to look at, to marvel at His creation, and to admire Him, to thank Him, to glorify Him. In verse 30 of Surah Rum, Surah 30 verse 30, the Almighty says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا. So, when you've seen all these signs and have understood that they are from God, then incline yourself towards God's religion with complete devotion. Fitrat Allahi allati fataran nasa alayha. This religion of God, the message of God, is based on human nature, the nature on which the Almighty has designed humans. There can be no change in God's nature. That's the right religion. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. But most people don't know. So the Almighty is telling us that the religion that we have been given to follow is based on the nature that the Almighty has designed us in. There is no difference between our nature and God's message. That is why when one reads God's message, one is moved, is positively influenced, because there is an affinity between the message and our nature, which gives a feeling of satisfaction and contentment to us when we read it. We move on to verses 38 and 39. The Almighty says, فَآتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَى حَقَّهُ وَالْمِسْكِينَ وَابْنَ السَّبِيلِ. Before this verse, the Almighty clarified that whatever you have in the form of sustenance is given to you by God. God arranges for the sustenance provisions of some people to be expanded, and He arranges for the sustenance provisions of others to be contracted. That's what His decision is. So when you've understood it, then atiz al-qurba haqqahu. Give the poor relatives their rights, wal miskin wabn sabil, and the needy and the travelers. So the wealth that you have been given, a part of it is yours for you to make use of for yourself and your family, but there is a part in your wealth which is the right of others. And whatever you give in interest to increase within the wealth of people, it will not increase with God. Your extra wealth is meant for benefiting others. If you can't give it to others for free, well, give them in loans, but don't ask for anything. It would be completely to the contrary of the Almighty's expectations if you are asking for interest. It will not increase with God, but what you give in zakat, seeking God's pleasure, those are going to multiply with God, and He's going to reward you. Finally, at the end of it, the Almighty is telling the Prophet, and we have presented all kinds of examples for humans in the Quran. And even if you bring them a sign the way they expect, they will still say, you are nothing but deceiving liars. That is, these people are not interested in God's message. Oh Prophet, don't be too worried about it, because it would sometimes come to the mind of the Prophet as well that if showing them a sign, some kind of a miracle, the way they are demanding, can bring them to faith, belief, so why not? I mean, it would be a worthwhile attempt. The Almighty says, no, that's not the case. No matter what signs or miracles you bring to them, they would still say that you're just a liar, you're deceiving. God thus seals the hearts of those who don't want to know. These people don't want to know, and God has sealed their hearts. So they're not going to believe no matter what happens. So, a prophet, be patient. God's promise is true. It's bound to happen. This whole struggle is going to end with you and this message of God prevailing and dominating, and they are going to be defeated and punished. So, be patient, O Prophet. God's promise is true. Let those who don't believe not dishearten you. They are trying to say evil, nasty things. Ignore them. This is your trial, your test, and the trial and test of your followers. Let them say whatever they want to say. There will come a time very soon that the Almighty is going to get hold of them and punish them adequately, fully. So wait until that time. May the Almighty enable us to understand His message properly, and may He enable us to follow it to the best of our abilities.